The rain fell softly on the streets of Paris as Inspector Claude Moreau walked through the corridors of the Ritz Hotel. It was September the 2nd, 1997, just one day after the world had been shaken by the tragic death of Princess Diana. The hotel was still buzzing with investigators, journalists, and staff members who looked pale and exhausted from the events of the previous night. Moreau had been assigned to investigate what seemed like a simple case of a missing security guard. But as he would soon discover, nothing about this case would be simple. The missing man was Henri Dubois, a 34-year-old former French military officer who had been working as part of the Royal Protection Detail during Diana's stay in Paris. According to the hotel records, Henri had been on duty the entire evening of August 30th. His shift was supposed to end at 6 a.m. on August 31st, but he had never shown up to check out. His supervisor, Marcel Fontaine, had tried calling him multiple times, but Henri's phone went straight to voicemail. What made this disappearance even stranger was that Henri was known for being extremely reliable and professional. Moreau began his investigation by interviewing the hotel staff who had worked that night. The concierge, Marie Dubois, remembered seeing Henri around 11 p.m. near the service elevators. She thought it was odd because that area was not part of his usual patrol route. The night manager mentioned that Henri had seemed nervous and distracted during his shift, which was unusual for someone who was normally calm and focused. The inspector's first major clue came from the hotel's security footage. The cameras showed Henri entering a restricted area of the hotel around midnight. This area housed the communication equipment and the main security monitoring station. What was troubling was that Henri had used an access card that belonged to another security officer who had been off duty that night. As Moreau dug deeper, he learned that Henri had been asking strange questions in the days leading up to Diana's arrival. Several staff members mentioned that he had inquired about the princess's schedule, her preferred routes through the hotel, and even details about the vehicles that would be used for her transportation. At first, these questions seemed normal for a security officer, but now they took on a more sinister meaning. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Moreau discovered that Henri had made several phone calls from his personal mobile phone during his shift. This was strictly against protocol for royal protection officers. The calls were made to a number that was registered to a private investigation agency in London. When Moreau contacted the agency, they claimed they had never heard of Henri Dubois and had no record of receiving any calls from him. Henri's apartment told a different story. When police entered his small flat in the 15th arrondissement, they found it had been hastily abandoned. Clothes were scattered on the floor. Important. Documents were missing from his desk and his passport was nowhere to be found. However, Moreau noticed something that others had missed. There was a small notebook hidden behind Henri's bookshelf that contained a series of dates, times, and cryptic notes. The notebook entries started 3 months before Diana's death and included detailed observations about security protocols at various high-end hotels in Paris. There were also notes about different escape routes from the city, train schedules to various European destinations, and what appeared to be code names for different individuals. One entry that particularly caught Moreau's attention was dated August 29th, just 2 days before the crash. It simply read, "The plan changes tonight. They know too much. Must disappear before dawn." As the inspector continued to piece together Henri's final hours, he began to realize that this was not just a case of a missing security guard. The evidence suggested that Henri might have been involved in something much larger and more dangerous. The timing of his disappearance combined with his suspicious behavior and the mysterious phone calls, painted a picture of a man who was either running from something or someone who knew too much about the events that would unfold that tragic night. The question that haunted Moreau was whether Henri had disappeared by choice or if he had been silenced by someone who wanted to keep certain secrets buried. As he prepared to dig deeper into the investigation, the inspector had no idea that he was about to uncover a conspiracy that reached far beyond a simple missing person case. The truth about Henri Dubois and his connection to the events of August 31st, 1997 would prove to be more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Inspector Moreau's investigation took a dramatic turn when he received an anonymous phone call on September 5th. The voice was disguised, but the caller claimed to have information about Henri Dubois. They arranged to meet at a small cafe in Montmartre, far from the tourist areas where they were less likely to be noticed. The mysterious informant turned out to be a woman in her 50s who introduced herself only as Sophie. She was nervous, constantly looking over her shoulder as she spoke in hushed tones. Sophie revealed that she had been Henri's girlfriend for the past 2 years, a relationship that Henri had kept secret from his colleagues and supervisors. According to Sophie, Henri had been acting strangely for weeks before Diana's arrival in Paris. He had become paranoid, checking their apartment for listening devices and insisting that they communicate only through written notes when discussing anything related to his work. Henri had told her that he had stumbled upon something that could change everything, but refused to give her any details. Sophie's most shocking revelation was that Henri had not disappeared alone. On the morning of August 31st, around 4 a.m., he had called her from a payphone and told her to pack a bag immediately. When she arrived at their predetermined meeting point near Gare du Nord train station, Henri was waiting with a man she had never seen before. The stranger was tall, wore expensive clothes, and spoke English with what sounded like an American accent. The three of them had boarded a train to Brussels together. During the journey, Henri had given Sophie a sealed envelope and made her promise to deliver it to Inspector Moreau if anything happened to him. The envelope contained photocopies of documents that Henri had somehow obtained from the hotel's security files, along with a detailed timeline of events from the night of Diana's death. What made these documents extraordinary was that they contradicted the official timeline that had been released to the public. According to Henri's notes, there had been a 40-minute gap in the security footage from the hotel's main entrance. During this time, several unidentified individuals had entered and left the building without being recorded. Henri had also documented unusual radio communications between different security teams that suggested coordination beyond normal protocol. Sophie explained that when they reached Brussels, Henri had become increasingly agitated. He kept saying that they were watching and that it was only a matter of time before they caught up with him. The American man, who Henri referred to only as Michael, seemed to be helping them, but also appeared to have his own agenda. Michael had arranged for safe passage to London, but Henri had suddenly changed his mind at the last minute. On their second day in Brussels, Henri had received a phone call that left him pale and shaking. After the call, he had told Sophie that he needed to go back to Paris to set things right. He believed that his disappearance had put innocent people in danger and that he was the only one who could expose the truth about what really happened that night. Sophie had begged him not to return, but Henri was determined. He had given her enough money to stay hidden for several months and made her promise to contact Inspector Moreau if she didn't hear from him within 2 weeks. That was the last time she had seen him alive. The documents that Sophie provided to Moreau painted a disturbing picture of the events leading up to Diana's death. Henri's notes suggested that there had been a change in the princess's security arrangements at the last minute, orchestrated by someone with high-level access. The usual route to the airport had been altered, and the decision to use the Pont de l'Alma tunnel had been made only hours before the fatal journey. More troubling were Henri's observations about the paparazzi who had been following Diana throughout her stay in Paris. According to his notes, several of the photographers were not registered with any legitimate news organizations. Henri had taken down their license plate numbers and had discovered that some of the vehicles were registered to companies that didn't appear to exist. Inspector Moreau realized that Henri had not simply been a missing security guard, but potentially a key witness to a much larger conspiracy. The evidence suggested that Henri had uncovered information that powerful people wanted to keep secret, and his disappearance might not have been voluntary after all. As Moreau delved deeper into Henri's background, he discovered that the former military officer had specialized in intelligence gathering during his service with the French army. Henri had the skills and knowledge necessary to uncover hidden operations and conspiracy networks. This expertise had made him valuable as a security officer, but had also made him dangerous to those with secrets to hide. The inspector's investigation was about to take another dramatic turn when he received word that Henri's body had been found in the Seine River. But the circumstances of the discovery would raise more questions than answers, and Moreau would soon realize that Henri's death was just the beginning of a much darker story. The phone call came at 6:30 a.m. on September 18th. A fisherman had discovered a body floating near the Ile Saint-Louis, and the initial identification suggested it might be Henri Dubois. Inspector Moreau rushed to the morgue, hoping to finally get answers but dreading what he might find. The body was indeed Henri's, but the condition raised immediate red flags for the experienced inspector. Henri had supposedly been in the water for over 2 weeks, but the decomposition was inconsistent with that timeline. Dr. Elizabeth Laurent, the medical examiner, privately told Moreau that the body showed signs of having been frozen and then thawed before being placed in the water. The autopsy revealed even more disturbing details. Henri had not drowned, as might be expected if he had jumped or fallen into the Seine. Instead, he had died from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, execution style. The bullet had been removed, but Dr. Laurent noted that it appeared to be from a professional-grade weapon, not something a common criminal would use. What made the discovery even more suspicious was Henri's clothing and personal effects. He was wearing the same clothes he had on when he left Brussels with Sophie, but several items were missing. His watch, which Sophie had described as a distinctive military timepiece that had belonged to his father, was gone. More importantly, a small recording device that Henri always carried was nowhere to be found. Inspector Moreau's investigation took on new urgency when he received a visit from 2 men claiming to be from French intelligence. They identified themselves as Agent Rousseau and Agent Blanchard and demanded that Moreau turn over all evidence related to Henri's case. They claimed that Henri had been involved in activities that threatened national security and that the investigation needed to be classified. Moreau was not easily intimidated, but he was surprised when his superior, Commissioner Vallée, called him into his office that same afternoon. The commissioner, who had always supported Moreau's thorough investigations, seemed nervous and uncomfortable. He informed Moreau that the Henri Dubois case was being transferred to a special unit and that Moreau's involvement was terminated immediately. But Moreau had not survived 20 years as a detective by following orders that didn't make sense. Before turning over the official files, he had made copies of everything, including Sophie's testimony and the documents Henri had gathered. He also had one advantage that the intelligence agents didn't know about. Henri had hidden a backup copy of his most important evidence in a safety deposit box, and Sophie had given Moreau the key. The contents of the safety deposit box were explosive. Henri had not only documented the security irregularities from the night of Diana's death, but had also uncovered evidence of a broader surveillance operation that had been monitoring the princess for months. The files included photographs taken from concealed cameras, transcripts of intercepted phone calls, and detailed reports about Diana's relationships and activities. One document that particularly caught Moreau's attention was a communication between unknown parties discussing Project Morningstar. The document was heavily redacted, but the visible portions suggested that Diana's relationship with Dodi Fayed was seen as a significant threat to certain interests. The document referenced permanent solutions and plausible scenarios in language that made Moreau's blood run cold. Henri had also managed to obtain copies of communication logs from the night of the crash. These showed that there had been numerous calls between various security agencies in the hours immediately before and after the accident. Some of these communications had originated from locations that were not supposed to have been involved in Diana's security arrangements. The most damning piece of evidence was a partial audio recording that Henry had made during his final shift at the Ritz Hotel. The recording captured a conversation between two unidentified men discussing timing and coordination. Although the quality was poor, Moreau could make out phrases like the tunnel approach and make it look natural. As Moreau studied the evidence, he began to understand why Henri had been killed. The former security guard had uncovered proof of a conspiracy that reached far beyond anything Moreau had initially imagined. The people responsible had been willing to eliminate Henri to protect their secrets, and they would undoubtedly be willing to kill again. The inspector realized that he was now in the same danger that had cost Henri his life. But he also knew that he might be the only person who could ensure that Henri's sacrifice was not in vain. The truth about what happened on the night of August 31st, 1997, was more complex and more sinister than the world had been told. Moreau made a decision that would change the course of his investigation and potentially his life. Instead of backing down, he would dig deeper into the conspiracy that Henri had uncovered. He would follow the evidence wherever it led, even if it meant taking on some of the most powerful people in France and beyond. The inspector began to prepare for what he knew would be the most dangerous investigation of his career. He had no way of knowing that his pursuit of the truth would lead him into a web of international intrigue that connected the streets of Paris to the highest levels of government and intelligence agencies around the world. Inspector Moreau knew he needed help, but he couldn't trust anyone in official channels. His decision to continue the investigation had put him in a precarious position, and he suspected that his own department might be compromised. That's when he remembered Jacques Mercier, a retired intelligence officer who had worked with international security agencies for over 30 years. Mercier agreed to meet Moreau at a small restaurant in the Latin Quarter. The older man listened carefully as Moreau explained Henri's discoveries and the subsequent attempts to cover up the investigation. Mercier's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the documents from Henri's safety deposit box. "You're dealing with something much bigger than you realize," Mercier told him. Project Morning Star wasn't just about Diana. It was part of a broader operation to monitor and control information about several high-profile individuals who were seen as threats to certain established interests. Mercier explained that he had heard rumors about Morning Star during his time with French intelligence, but he had never been able to confirm its existence. According to his sources, the operation involved multiple intelligence agencies from different countries working together in an unofficial capacity. The goal was to gather compromising information about public figures who might challenge existing power structures. The revelation that Diana had been targeted months before her death painted a chilling picture of premeditation. Mercier showed Moreau classified documents that suggested Diana's relationship with Dodi Fayed had triggered alarm bells in intelligence communities across Europe and America. Her growing influence and her willingness to speak out on controversial issues had made her a significant concern for those who preferred to operate in shadows. But Henri had uncovered something even more disturbing than a surveillance operation. Among his notes was evidence that certain members of Diana's security detail had been compromised. Not all of them were working for the same interests, and some may not have even known they were being manipulated. Henri had identified at least 3 security officers who had received payments from unknown sources in the weeks leading up to Diana's death. Mercier's contacts in the intelligence community confirmed some of Henri's suspicions. There had indeed been unusual activity among various agencies on the night of August 31st. Communication channels that were normally inactive had suddenly come alive, and several high-ranking officials had been in emergency meetings throughout the early morning hours of September 1st. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Mercier received a call from a contact in London. The British intelligence services were asking questions about French involvement in Diana's security arrangements. More specifically, they were trying to determine whether any French agents had been operating independently on the night of the crash. This revelation suggested that not all intelligence agencies had been working together as smoothly as previously thought. There might have been competing operations running simultaneously, with different groups pursuing their own agendas. Henri may have stumbled into the middle of this conflict and paid the ultimate price for his discovery. Moreau and Mercier decided to track down Michael, the mysterious American who had helped Henri and Sophie escape to Brussels. Using Henry's notes and Sophie's description, they were able to identify him as Michael Stanford, a former CIA operative who now worked as a private contractor for various government and corporate clients. Finding Stanford proved to be more challenging than expected. He seemed to have disappeared from Brussels shortly after Henri's return to Paris. However, Mercier's contacts eventually located him in a small town in Switzerland, where he was reportedly lying low and avoiding contact with his usual employers. When they finally confronted Stanford, he was initially reluctant to talk. But when shown evidence of Henry's murder, he began to open up about what he knew. Stanford confirmed that he had been hired to extract Henry from Paris, but he claimed he didn't know why his client wanted Henry protected until it was too late. According to Stanford, Henry had been targeted for elimination because he had obtained recordings of conversations that took place in the hours before Diana's death. These recordings allegedly contained discussions about changing security protocols and ensuring that certain events would unfold as planned. Henry had been in the right place at the right time to overhear communications that were never meant to be recorded. Stanford's most shocking revelation was that Henry's murder had not been authorized by the same people who had originally hired Stanford to protect him. This suggested that there were multiple factions involved in the conspiracy, and not all of them were working toward the same goals. Henri had become caught in the middle of a power struggle between different groups who were trying to control the narrative around Diana's death. The American contractor also revealed that Henri had given him a backup recording before returning to Paris. This recording was hidden in a location that only Henri knew, and Stanford had been instructed to retrieve it only if Henry was killed. The problem was that Henri had never had the chance to tell Stanford where the recording was hidden. As Moreau processed this information, he realized that the key to solving Henri's murder and uncovering the truth about Diana's death might still be out there, waiting to be found. But he also understood that powerful forces were still working to keep these secrets buried, and anyone who got too close to the truth would face the same fate as Henri Dubois. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sophie contacted Inspector Moreau again, this time with information that could change everything. She had remembered something Henri had told her during their train journey to Brussels, a childhood story about hiding treasures in places that only he would think to look. Sophie explained that Henri had grown up in a small apartment building in Belleville, where his grandmother had lived until her death 5 years earlier. The building was scheduled for demolition, but Henri had maintained access to his grandmother's old apartment through a friend who worked for the demolition company. If Henri had hidden the backup recording anywhere, Sophie believed it would be there. Moreau, Mercier, and Sophie made their way to the abandoned building under cover of darkness. The neighborhood was quiet, and most of the surrounding buildings were empty as the area underwent urban renewal. Using Henri's old keys, they gained access to the apartment on the 4th floor. The apartment was exactly as Henri's grandmother had left it, covered in dust and filled with memories from another era. Sophie guided them to Henri's childhood bedroom, which had remained unchanged since he was a teenager. Behind a loose floorboard underneath the window, they found a small waterproof container that held what they were looking for. The recording device contained nearly 2 hours of audio from the night of Diana's death. Henri had positioned a small recorder in a ventilation shaft that allowed him to capture conversations from the hotel's main security office. The quality was poor, but the content was explosive. The recordings revealed that there had been multiple changes to Diana's security arrangements in the final hours before her departure from the Ritz Hotel. These changes had not been random or reactive, but appeared to be part of a coordinated plan. Several voices could be heard discussing specific timing requirements and ensuring that certain security personnel would be in specific positions. Most damning was a conversation that took place around 11:30 p.m., just as Diana and Dodi were preparing to leave the hotel. An unidentified voice could be heard giving instructions about the route through the Pont de l'Alma tunnel. The voice specifically mentioned that the tunnel approach would provide optimal conditions for the planned scenario. Another section of the recording captured communications between different security teams that revealed knowledge of the pursuing paparazzi vehicles before Diana's car had even left the hotel. This suggested that the photographer's movements were being coordinated or at least monitored in real time. The most chilling part of the recording was a brief exchange that took place after news of the crash had reached the hotel. One voice could be heard saying, "It's done. The package has been delivered." Another voice responded, "Confirm all secondary evidence is contained." This conversation took place more than an hour before the official confirmation of Diana's death, suggesting that certain people knew the outcome before it was publicly announced. As Moreau listened to the recordings, he realized that Henri had uncovered evidence of what appeared to be a sophisticated assassination plot. The crash in the Pont de l'Alma tunnel had not been an accident caused by drunk driving and aggressive paparazzi, as the official investigation had concluded. Instead, it appeared to be the result of careful planning and coordination by unknown parties. But the recordings also revealed something else that deeply troubled Moreau. Several of the voices belonged to people who were supposed to be protecting Diana, not plotting against her. The conspiracy had infiltrated the very security apparatus that was meant to keep the princess safe. Mercier's analysis of the recordings confirmed Moreau's suspicions. The former intelligence officer identified several code words and phrases that were consistent with professional assassination protocols. The level of planning and coordination suggested that this operation had been in development for weeks or possibly months. The evidence also suggested that Henri's death had been necessary to prevent these recordings from becoming public. The people responsible for Diana's assassination had been willing to kill again to protect their secret, and they would undoubtedly continue to eliminate anyone who threatened to expose the truth. As news of their discovery began to sink in, Moreau realized that he was now in possession of evidence that could potentially rewrite history. But he also understood that this evidence made him and his allies extremely dangerous to very powerful people. The same forces that had killed Henri would not hesitate to eliminate anyone else who stood in their way. The inspector faced a crucial decision. He could turn the evidence over to higher authorities and hope that justice would prevail, but he had already seen how easily official investigations could be controlled or suppressed. Alternatively, he could attempt to make the evidence public, but doing so would put himself and others at extreme risk. The weight of Henri's sacrifice and the magnitude of the conspiracy weighed heavily on Moreau's mind. The security guard had given his life to uncover the truth about one of the most significant events of the late 20th century. Now it was up to Moreau to decide how to honor that sacrifice while ensuring that the truth would finally see the light of day. Time was running out, and Moreau knew that powerful forces were already working to track down anyone who might threaten their carefully constructed narrative about Diana's death. The final phase of his investigation would require courage, cunning, and a willingness to risk everything for the sake of justice. Inspector Moreau knew he had to act quickly. The evidence he possessed was too dangerous to keep hidden, but releasing it through normal channels would likely result in its suppression and his own elimination. He needed a plan that would ensure the truth reached the public while protecting those who had helped him uncover it. Working with Mercier, Moreau developed a strategy to simultaneously release the evidence to multiple news organizations across different countries. They carefully selected journalists who had established reputations for investigating sensitive stories and who worked for publications that were less likely to be influenced by government pressure. The plan required precise timing. Copies of Henri's recordings, documents, and photographic evidence were prepared for distribution to journalists in London, New York, Berlin, and Rome. Each package was accompanied by detailed explanations and supporting documentation that would allow the recipients to verify the authenticity of the evidence. On October 15, 1997, Moreau initiated what he called Operation Morning Light, a deliberate reference to the conspiracy's Morning Star designation. The evidence packages were delivered simultaneously to all target recipients, making it impossible for any single government or organization to suppress the story before it reached the public. The first news reports appeared within 48 hours. The initial coverage was cautious, with news organizations carefully verifying the evidence before making bold claims. But as more details emerged, and the authenticity of the recordings was confirmed by independent audio experts, the story began to gain momentum. The revelation that Princess Diana's death may have been the result of an assassination plot rather than a tragic accident sent shockwaves around the world. The evidence suggested that multiple intelligence agencies had been involved in a conspiracy to eliminate Diana because of her growing influence and her relationship with Dodi Fayed. Government officials in France, Britain, and the United States initially dismissed the allegations as conspiracy theories, but the quality and specificity of the evidence made it difficult to ignore. Independent investigations were launched in several countries, and pressure mounted for the official inquiries into Diana's death to be reopened. Henri Dubois was posthumously recognized as a hero who had given his life to uncover one of the most significant conspiracies of the modern era. His story became a symbol of individual courage in the face of overwhelming institutional power, and his sacrifice inspired others to come forward with additional information about the events surrounding Diana's death. Sophie, who had risked everything to help bring Henry's evidence to light, was provided with protection and a new identity. She eventually wrote a book about her relationship with Henri and their discovery of the conspiracy, which became an international bestseller and further raised public awareness about the true circumstances of Diana's death. Michael Stanford, the American contractor who had initially tried to protect Henri, cooperated fully with the international investigations that followed. His testimony provided crucial details about the competing factions within the intelligence community and helped investigators understand the complex web of relationships that had enabled the conspiracy. The impact of Operation Morning Light extended far beyond the Diana case. The evidence of intelligence agency collaboration in assassination plots led to significant reforms in oversight and accountability measures. Several high-ranking officials in multiple countries were forced to resign, and new protocols were established to prevent similar conspiracies in the future. For Inspector Moreau, the successful exposure of the conspiracy marked both the end of his most important case and the beginning of a new chapter in his life. The international attention that followed the story made it impossible for him to continue working as a regular police inspector, so he transitioned into a new career as an international consultant on intelligence reform and government accountability. The legacy of Henri Dubois lived on through the Dubois Foundation, which was established to support whistleblowers and individuals who risked their lives to expose government corruption and abuse of power. The foundation provided legal protection, financial support, and safe haven for people who found themselves in situations similar to Henri's. Years later, as Moreau reflected on the case that had changed his life, he often thought about the quiet security guard who had stumbled upon a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. Henri's courage and determination had ultimately triumphed over the powerful forces that had tried to silence him. The truth about Princess Diana's death had finally been revealed, but the cost had been enormous. Henri Dubois had paid with his life, and many others had risked everything to ensure that his sacrifice would not be in vain. The story served as a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming power and institutional corruption, individuals willing to stand up for truth and justice could still make a difference. The Pont de l'Alma tunnel in Paris became an unofficial memorial not only to Princess Diana but also to Henri Dubois and others who had died seeking the truth about that tragic night in August 1997. Their story would continue to inspire future generations of investigators, journalists, and ordinary citizens who refused to accept official explanations that didn't match the evidence. In the end, Inspector Moreau realized that Henri's greatest achievement was not just uncovering a conspiracy, but proving that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would eventually find a way to surface. The missing royal guard had become a symbol of hope for anyone who believed that justice and accountability were worth fighting for, regardless of the personal cost.